A man drives down the center divider of a busy Southern California highway, matching speed with a stranger's pickup truck, close enough to make eye contact through two windshields. He is not chasing a rival gang member. He is not settling an old score. He does not know the man behind the wheel of that truck at all. Minutes later, bullets are tearing through the truck's bumper, its taillight, its windshield, missing a 13-year-old boy in the front seat by a matter of inches, all because that stranger's car happened to clip his on a stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway. That is the kind of year Fall Boy was having in 2016. A member of the Rolling 40s Crips with a reputation as an active, trigger-happy shooter, Fall Boy spent that year burning through targets with a recklessness that eventually turned on the people closest to him, his own homies, before spilling out onto a public freeway in front of a father and his young son. What makes his story different from the thousands of other gun cases moving through Los Angeles courts every year is not the violence itself, which is grimly ordinary in the world he operated in, but the sheer indiscriminate range of it. In the span of 6 months, Fall Boy allegedly shot a man who threatened him, a man who was stealing from him, and a total stranger who cut him off in traffic. 2 of those men were his own homies. There is a phrase that gets used constantly in street culture to describe someone who is quick to use a gun without much thought for the consequences. And by every account that eventually surfaced in court, Fall Boy earned that description many times over during a single chaotic calendar year. What follows is the story of how that reputation was built, how it eventually turned on the very people it was supposed to protect, and how a case built almost entirely on silence and fear finally came apart because of the one thing nobody in that world can fully control: an accident, a witness with something to gain, and a mother who did not realize what she was walking into. The Rolling 40s Crips are one of the older and more established Crip sets operating out of South Los Angeles, part of a sprawling network of numbered Crip sets that trace back to the gang's founding decades in the 1970s and have since splintered, multiplied, and fought each other across generations. Like most sets of its size, the Rolling 40s are not a single unified organization with the chain of command so much as a loose collection of cliques and individuals bound together by geography, history, and a shared identity, which means that internal disputes, jealousy, personal beefs, and outright betrayal are just as common inside the set as conflict with outside rivals. It is a dynamic that shows up again and again in gang cases across Los Angeles. The most dangerous person in a member's life is not always an opposing gang member from a rival block. Sometimes it is the person standing next to him, someone who has known him for years, shared meals with him, and would be the first person called on to back him up if trouble ever came from the outside. By 2016, Fall Boy had built a name for himself within that world as someone who was quick to pull a trigger, a reputation that in street culture often functions less like a warning and more like a credential. Being known as an active shooter, someone willing to actually use a gun rather than simply carry one, carries real social currency in that environment, translating into respect, fear, and a kind of protection that comes from being someone other people are reluctant to test. That kind of reputation does not build itself overnight. It accumulates through repeated demonstrations, through word that travels quickly across a set and beyond it, until a name becomes shorthand for a certain kind of danger that other people learn to factor into every interaction they have with him, whether that interaction involves a rival, a stranger, or, as it would turn out, someone from within his own set entirely. But that same willingness to shoot first and rarely hesitate is exactly what made Fall Boy dangerous to be around, including for the people who considered themselves his friends. Over the course of that single year, his gun would find its way into the lives of at least 4 different people, 2 of his own homies from the rolling 40s, and 2 complete strangers who had the misfortune of crossing his path on the road. What separates Fall Boy's case from countless similar ones moving through the courts is the fact that so much of that violence, rather than being directed outward at declared enemies, ended up landing on people who were technically supposed to be under his protection. The first of those shootings took place on June 16, 2016, when a man named Forexter was shot while driving his own car. The impact of the gunfire sent his vehicle veering into a light pole. Police arriving at the scene recovered 3 spent .40 caliber shell casings, along with a live, unfired .40 caliber round left behind at the location, physical evidence that would later help investigators connect the case to a specific type of weapon and eventually tie it to a broader pattern of shootings connected to the same shooter. Forexter survived the shooting and was taken to the hospital, but he refused to cooperate with police at the time, a decision consistent with the street code that governs these kinds of disputes, where going to the authorities is treated as a far greater betrayal than the shooting itself, regardless of how close to death the victim actually came. It would take months and an unrelated police investigation before the full story behind Forexter's shooting came out. According to a cooperating witness who later testified against Fall Boy, the motive traced back to a personal dispute between the 2 men, one serious enough that Forexter had allegedly threatened to kill Fall Boy at some point beforehand. Rather than wait to see whether that threat would ever materialize, Fall Boy reportedly decided to act first, going directly to Forexter's home and opening fire on him while he sat in his car. It was, by the account that eventually reached the courtroom, a preemptive strike rather than a spontaneous outburst, the kind of calculated retaliation that suggests Fall Boy had been sitting with the threat against his life for some time before deciding how he wanted to respond to it. That kind of premeditation, choosing a specific time and location rather than reacting in the heat of the moment, is a detail that distinguishes this shooting from something impulsive or purely emotional. Whatever the precise sequence of events, the result was the same. One of Fall Boy's own homies from the rolling 40s, shot and left for dead over a dispute that never made it anywhere near the streets in the form of official reporting, because Forexter, like so many victims in this world, chose silence over cooperation, understanding that talking to police carried its own set of consequences that could prove just as dangerous as the original shooting itself. To understand why cases like Forexter's and Victor's so often stall out, it helps to understand the actual calculation victims in this world are forced to make. Cooperating with police against a fellow gang member does not just risk retaliation from the shooter himself, it risks marking the victim as untrustworthy within an entire network of people he still has to live around, people who share his neighborhood, his social circle, and in many cases, his own family connections. A single act of cooperation can follow someone for years, reshaping how they are treated by people who had nothing to do with the original shooting at all, simply because breaking the code of silence is treated as a categorical betrayal regardless of the circumstances that led to it. That calculation helps explain why physical evidence, no matter how overwhelming, so often sits unused in cases like these. Detectives can recover shell casings, trace a weapon, even identify a likely shooter through informal channels, and still find themselves stuck without a victim willing to formally testify in open court. It is precisely this dynamic that makes cooperating witnesses like this so valuable to prosecutors and so controversial within the communities these cases originate from, where the label of informant can follow a person and their family for years after the courtroom proceedings have ended. A witness with nothing left to lose, someone already facing serious prison time of their own, becomes one of the only realistic paths toward accountability in cases where the actual victims have every reason in the world to stay quiet, a reality that shapes far more gang prosecutions across the country than most people outside that world ever fully realize. If the shooting of 4 Exeter could be explained away, however uncomfortably, as a matter of self-preservation, the shooting that followed just 4 months later offered no such justification. On October 24, 2016, a man named Victor was shot multiple times while out on the street. Wounded, Victor managed to drive himself to a nearby gas station, where he was eventually helped and taken for treatment, a detail that speaks to a level of resilience and adrenaline that allowed him to escape the immediate scene despite his injuries, rather than collapsing where he was shot. Investigators recovered 39 shell casings from the scene, an extraordinary number for a single shooting, and a detail that speaks to just how much gunfire was actually exchanged, or at least fired during the incident, suggesting either a prolonged exchange or a level of overkill that went far beyond what would have been necessary to simply wound one man. Victor, like 4 Exeter, was also affiliated with the Rolling 40s. At one point, according to the account that later emerged in court, he and Farboy had actually been close, the kind of relationship within a set that is supposed to come with an unwritten guarantee of protection rather than danger, the sort of bond built over years of shared history in the same neighborhood, the same struggles, and presumably the same loyalty to the same set, exactly what made the eventual betrayal so jarring to the people who knew both men. Victor had reportedly trusted Farboy enough to consider him close, a trust that evidently did nothing to shield him once suspicion of theft entered the equation. That guarantee meant nothing once Farboy came to believe that Victor was stealing money from him. Whether that theft was real, exaggerated, or simply a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control was never fully settled in the record. But the consequence was unambiguous. Another homie, another shooting, another survivor who declined to testify against the man who had pulled the trigger on him. By the fall of 2016, Farboy had shot 2 people from inside his own gang in the span of a single summer, both of whom had reasons connected directly to Farboy himself, whether real or perceived, rather than to any conflict with the rival set. It is worth sitting with just how unusual that pattern actually is. Even in a world defined by violence, most of that violence is still organized around an external enemy, a rival bloc, an opposing set, someone from outside the immediate circle of trust. Farboy's violence, at least for these 2 incidents, was entirely internal, aimed at people who were supposed to be on his own side, people who likely never expected the threat to come from within their own ranks until the moment it actually did. The shooting that would eventually end Farboy's run in the streets had nothing to do with gang politics at all. On December 2nd, 2016, at around 6 o'clock in the evening, a man named Javier was driving his pickup truck along the Pacific Coast Highway with his 13-year-old son sitting in the front passenger seat, likely on their way home from an ordinary errand or activity, the kind of unremarkable weekday drive that millions of families make without a second thought. Farboy, driving his own car nearby, pulled alongside Javier's truck near the center divider and stayed there, matching his speed for a stretch of highway before the 2 vehicles collided. Javier kept driving after the initial contact, apparently trying to put distance between himself and whatever was happening, a natural reaction from someone who had no way of knowing at that moment just how serious the situation was about to become. Farboy cut him off, forcing Javier to stop his truck. What followed was the kind of moment that, on any given day in Los Angeles traffic, could have ended with nothing more than raised voices and an insurance exchange, the sort of minor collision that happens on freeways across the country every single day without any further consequence. Farboy got out of his car, cursing at Javier and reaching toward his own waistband, a gesture that needed no further explanation to anyone who has spent time around people who carry weapons. Javier, understandably alarmed, drove away rather than staying to find out what Farboy was reaching for, a split-second decision that likely saved his life and his son's life in the moments that followed. That decision to flee did not end the confrontation. As Javier merged onto the freeway, Farboy followed him, and within moments, Javier heard multiple gunshots ringing out over the noise of highway traffic. One round struck his truck's bumper, another hit the taillight, a third round found another part of the vehicle entirely. Looking back, Javier could see a handgun being held up against the driver's side window of Farboy's car, aimed directly at him and his son, a sight that would be terrifying enough for any adult but almost unimaginable to process while also trying to protect a child sitting inches away. In the seconds that followed, Javier reached over toward his 13-year-old, telling him to get down, an instinctive and desperate act of protection playing out at highway speed, the kind of split-second parental reflex that requires no conscious thought at all. A bullet then entered the truck and exited through the front windshield, close enough to make clear just how thin the margin had been between a frightening story and a fatal one, a piece of glass and a few inches of trajectory standing between an ordinary evening and an unthinkable tragedy. Javier slammed on his brakes. Farboy, still pursuing, attempted to pass him on the right-hand shoulder, and in doing so, clipped the corner of Javier's truck, sending it spinning out of control on a busy public highway during evening traffic, an act that in itself could have caused a catastrophic multi-vehicle accident entirely separate from the gunfire. Somehow, Javier managed to regain control of the vehicle. What he saw next gave him an opening. Farboy's own car was now stalled or struggling on the freeway. Rather than simply fleeing the scene entirely, which would have been the obvious and safest choice for most people in his position, Javier made the decision to speed toward Farboy's vehicle himself, an act of genuine courage under extraordinary pressure, attempting to disable the car that had just fired multiple rounds at his son. Farboy and a passenger in his vehicle abandoned the car and fled on foot moments before it caught fire, leaving behind the vehicle that would ultimately become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. Javier and his son got out of their truck and called 911, ending an ordeal that had unfolded over the course of just a few harrowing minutes, but would take investigators months to fully untangle. Police arriving at the scene of the burning vehicle found a gun discarded in the grass near the driver's side door of the abandoned car, evidence that would ultimately prove critical to the case. A weapon left behind in the chaos of the moment when getting away on foot mattered more than covering their tracks. But it was what happened next that truly unraveled Farboy's attempt to disappear into the aftermath. While officers were still actively working the crime scene, Farboy's own mother arrived. She told police that an unnamed friend had informed her that Farboy had been involved in an accident, a detail that, on its own, might have seemed innocuous, the kind of concerned parent showing up after hearing secondhand news that plays out in countless unrelated situations every day. The problem was that she was also the registered owner of the vehicle, now sitting burned out on the shoulder of the freeway, a fact that transformed her simple act of parental concern into the single piece of information that would eventually connect her son to a shooting he had otherwise managed to walk away from cleanly. That single detail connected Farboy directly to the car, the gun found beside it, and by extension, the shooting that had just terrorized a father and his son on a public highway. It is a detail that captures something almost universal about how these cases actually get solved. Rarely is it a single brilliant piece of detective work that cracks a case like this. More often, it is exactly this kind of small human misstep, a worried mother showing up at a crime scene without realizing what she was walking into, that hands investigators the thread they need to start pulling, a thread that a more cautious or better informed family member might never have handed over so freely. Days later, Javier went to the police station and was shown a photo lineup. He identified Farboy as the man who had shot at him and his son, an identification that, combined with the vehicle registration and the discarded weapon, gave prosecutors exactly the kind of clean evidentiary chain that so many of these cases involving reluctant or terrified victims simply never managed to produce. While the Javier case moved forward on the strength of physical evidence and an eyewitness identification, the two earlier shootings involving Forexter and Victor remained cold, propped up by nothing more than the refusal of both victims to speak to police. That changed in February 2017 when detectives investigating an unrelated homicide interviewed a man referred to in court records simply as D. D knew Farboy personally, and when detectives began asking him general questions about certain shootings in the area, an unrelated inquiry that happened to intersect with Farboy's case almost by chance, D offered up something they had not expected: detailed knowledge of 3 separate shootings that Farboy had allegedly committed, including the ones involving Forexter and Victor. D's cooperation did not come free. He was at the time facing his own serious legal exposure, staring down more than 14 years in prison on gun charges of his own, the kind of sentence that tends to sharply focus a person's priorities and reshape their relationship to loyalty almost overnight. In exchange for his testimony against Farboy, D negotiated a plea deal that reduced his own sentence dramatically, down to 1 year in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. It is worth pausing on the scale of that trade. A man facing over a decade behind bars walked away with a single year in county jail, a deal made possible entirely because he was willing to testify in detail about crimes committed by someone else, a transaction that plays out constantly in gang prosecutions across the country, but rarely gets the scrutiny it deserves, given how directly it shapes which cases actually make it to trial and which remain permanently unsolved. This is how the vast majority of these cases actually get built in real life, not through confessions extracted under interrogation lights, but through negotiated exchanges where one person's freedom becomes the currency used to buy testimony against another. D's account gave prosecutors, for the first time, a version of events for the Forexter and Victor shootings that came from something other than physical evidence alone. A person who claimed Farboy had directly told him what happened and why, filling in motive and context that the shell casings and hospital records alone could never provide. Armed with D's testimony and the physical evidence connecting Farboy to the freeway shooting, prosecutors charged him in connection with all 3 incidents: the shooting of Forexter, the shooting of Victor, and the shooting at Javier and his son on the Pacific Coast Highway. The outcome, when it finally came, was a study in exactly how difficult these cases are to prove even with a cooperating witness willing to talk, a reminder that the standard of proof required in a criminal trial does not bend simply because prosecutors believe they know what happened. The jury convicted Fallboy on the charge connected to shooting at Javier's truck, the one incident in the case that came with an eyewitness identification, physical evidence recovered directly from the abandoned vehicle, and a mother's own accidental confirmation tying her son to the car. That combination of independent, corroborating pieces of evidence, none of which relied on the word of a single cooperating witness with an obvious incentive to shade his testimony, gave jurors something solid enough to convict on beyond a reasonable doubt, a bar that the other two shootings simply never managed to clear despite everything investigators believed they knew. But on the charges connected to Forrester and Victor, the jury acquitted him. Without either victim willing to testify, the case against Fallboy for those two shootings rested almost entirely on Diggs' secondhand account of what Fallboy had allegedly told him. Testimony that, however detailed, still amounted to one person's word about a private conversation delivered by a witness who had every incentive in the world to cooperate given what he stood to gain from doing so. That combination proved too thin to convict on, even though the physical evidence at both scenes, the shell casings, the wounds, the pattern of two Rolling 40s members getting shot by someone within their own set, all pointed in the same general direction. Fallboy was ultimately sentenced to the high term of 7 years for the shooting connected to Javier's truck, a sentence increased further by an additional term for a separate robbery charge that was added to his case during the same overall proceeding. Taken together, the total prison time reflected the freeway shooting almost exclusively, a strange kind of justice in which the two shootings that targeted people within his own community, the two shootings where real human beings had actually been hit with bullets and nearly killed, ended in acquittals, while the incident that came closest to being described as a moment of pure road rage, one where the shots ultimately missed their human targets entirely, became the one that actually sent him to prison for the majority of his sentence. There is a term that has become common in recent years for describing exactly the kind of behavior Fallboy displayed throughout 2016, crashing out. It refers to a period of reckless, often self-destructive behavior, a sustained loss of control where someone abandons whatever caution or restraint had previously governed their actions and starts lashing out at everything and everyone around them, consequences be damned. Fallboy's year fits that description almost perfectly. He did not shoot a single rival in an organized act of retaliation against an opposing set. He shot two of his own homies over personal disputes that had nothing to do with gang politics. And then, within weeks of the second shooting, he escalated a minor traffic collision into a highway gunfight that could have easily killed a 13-year-old boy who had absolutely nothing to do with any of it. A level of escalation that goes well beyond what even the most violent gang disputes typically call for. What makes Fallboy's story worth revisiting years later is not simply the violence itself, since Los Angeles courts process cases like this with grim regularity. It is the specific shape of the danger he represented, a danger that his own homies eventually understood better than anyone. Being affiliated with someone like Fallboy did not offer protection in the way gang affiliation is supposed to function. If anything, it offered the opposite, a heightened risk that comes from being close enough to someone that a personal disagreement, a suspicion of theft, an old threat could become the trigger for gunfire that had nothing to do with any outside enemy at all. Forrester and Victor were not ops, they were homies, and that distinction meant nothing once Fallboy decided they had wronged him, a reality that likely reshaped how everyone around him in the Rolling 40s calculated the actual risk of staying close to a man with that particular reputation. In the years since his release, Farboy has become a recognizable figure well beyond the neighborhoods where these shootings originally took place, building a public persona around exactly the kind of reputation that got him convicted in the first place. He has appeared in interviews discussing prison politics and street codes with a candor that has drawn real attention online, describing in detail how he handled conflicts behind bars and how he expects to be treated by anyone who ends up sharing a cell block with him, comments that have circulated widely among fans of that specific corner of internet content built around gang culture and prison life, and he has more recently joined the No Jumper Media Network, extending his notoriety into the world of internet content and interviews. That platform has come with its own complications. In recent months, Farboy has found himself in a very public back and forth with a fellow Rolling 40s affiliated rapper, an inner circle beef playing out not in the streets this time, but across social media and podcast appearances, a conflict that observers who remember his 2016 case can only hope resolves itself with considerably less gunfire than the last time internal tensions within the Rolling 40s escalated into real violence. Strip away the specific names and dates, and Farboy's story becomes a useful lens for understanding something that gets lost in most conversations about gang violence, which tend to frame it almost entirely as a conflict between organized opposing sides. The reality on the ground is messier and, in some ways, more disturbing. Gangs are not corporations with clean chains of command and clearly defined enemies. They are loose networks of individuals held together by geography and shared history, and within that network, ordinary human conflicts, debts, jealousy, suspicion, perceived disrespect can turn lethal just as easily as conflict with a genuine outside rival. Forexter and Victor did not die, but they came close, and they came close at the hands of someone who was supposed to be standing on their side of the war, someone who had presumably shared the same corners, the same enemies, and the same sense of shared purpose that gang affiliation is meant to provide. The case also illustrates something specific about how these prosecutions actually unfold in practice. Physical evidence alone, even overwhelming physical evidence like 39 shell casings at a single scene, is often not enough to secure a conviction if the victim refuses to testify, a refusal rooted in a code of silence that exists specifically because talking to police is treated as a more serious betrayal within that world than almost any other act, including nearly being murdered. It took an unrelated homicide investigation and a cooperating witness with his own decade of prison time on the line to even begin unraveling what had actually happened to Forexter and Victor. And even then, that secondhand testimony was not enough on its own to convict. The case that actually stuck was the one built on the least deliberate evidence of all: a discarded gun, a burned car, and a mother who showed up at the wrong crime scene at exactly the wrong moment, none of which required a single person to break the code of silence that had otherwise protected Farboy from accountability for months. It is also worth considering what this outcome communicated, however unintentionally, to everyone else watching from within the Rolling 40s and beyond. A shooter who could open fire on two of his own affiliates and still walk away without a single conviction tied to either incident sends a message about the actual risk calculus involved in that kind of violence, regardless of what the law technically says on paper. The deterrent effect that the justice system is supposed to provide depends entirely on consistency, on the belief that violence carries real, predictable consequences. When 2 out of 3 shootings end in acquittal purely because the victims refuse to testify, that deterrent effect collapses almost entirely, leaving behind only the threat of prosecution for the one category of shooting nobody can fully control for, the kind involving a stranger in public with independent witnesses who have no history with the shooter and no reason to protect him. Far Boy's story, in the end, offers no clean lesson about deterrence or redemption at all. He served his time for one shooting out of at least 3, built a public platform in the years that followed, and has already found himself embroiled in a new inner circle conflict that, as of this writing, remains confined to words rather than bullets. Whether that restraint holds is an open question, and given his history, not one anyone close to the situation seems particularly eager to bet on. If there is a single through line connecting the version of Far Boy who shot his own homies in 2016 to the version who now trades disses with another Rolling 40s affiliate online, it is a consistent unwillingness to let any perceived slight go unanswered, whether that slight comes from a rival, a friend, or a stranger who happened to be driving too close on the freeway. That pattern, more than any single incident described here, may ultimately be the closest thing to a defining trait this entire case reveals about the man at the center of it.